Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Cains. I'm the 469th Australian Nuffield Scholar. And my topic is about the benefits of raw milk cheese production with a particular focus on the Australian market. It's a profound source of pride to be here today, to be invited to the beautiful city of Perth to camembert scent my findings. See what I did there? Anyway. This involved the arduous task of travelling around the world, including France, Spain, UK, Wales, USA and Canada, in the pursuit of talking to cheesemakers and eating their produce for research purposes. Of course, none of this would have been possible without the generous support of the Royal Agricultural Society of New South Wales, who, goes without saying, is part of the agricultural firmament in this country. They've been supporting rural and regional farmers, especially in New South Wales, for over 200 years. For such a young country, that is an enormous contribution. And I think we should give them a round of applause. Oh, look, there's a couple of medals where we won the champion cheese. Pecora Dairy is the business that my wife Cressida and I founded in 2011. We milk 150 East Frisian ewes on 100 hectares, making over 10 tonnes of award-winning cheese. We also run a hospitality venue called Pecora Cheese and Wine that sells, funnily enough, cheese and wine. And we're the first Australian cheesemakers to be licensed to make raw milk cheeses. So our farm is located in Robertson, New South Wales. It's a lush green part of the world. It's where the movie Babe was filmed. Our farm's paddocks are interspersed with cool climate rainforest, creeks, wetlands that spill out over pastures. Now, I can tell you that story in words, but what I'd really love to do is show you what that story tastes like in a piece of cheese. And I reckon that raw milk cheese is like a camera. It gives us a snapshot of what our farming system tastes like on a plate on that particular day that the milk was extracted and the cheese was made. Okay, so today I will cover these topics. I'll cover the Australian dairy market and context. I'll cover the concept of terroir and how it applies to a marketing opportunity for cheese. I'll talk about my lessons abroad, and in particular the UK and Ireland, and also some recommendations to think about. Now, in this next slide, I want to paint a bit of a picture of the Australian dairy industry. So just four graphs. The first graph really gives us the beginning, I think, of the conclusion that Aussie dairy has never been more industrialised or commoditised and less diversified than it really is at the moment. This graph is those particular dairy farmers that have got fewer than 200 cows and the rate at which they are exiting the industry. So the average herd size in Australia is about the mid-300s. The top right figure shows, it's a pretty sad state actually, it shows Australia's manufacturing of cheese, specialty fancy cheese, is falling off a cliff. Today, 36% of Australia's milk product goes into manufactured good. At the start of the millennium, we were putting 58% of our milk into manufactured product. So what's happening? We've heard the story many times today. The ever-growing Asian market for dairy has grown to over $1.5 billion. It's no wonder why our exports and productions are skewed towards more commodity product. And I'm sure the risks, sovereign risks, market concentration, the deterioration of diversity of product in our mix hasn't escaped anyone. And interestingly, The last graph shows how UK cheese production has gone from strength to strength. Liz Truss, who was the British Prime Minister for about 2.5 seconds, said that the UK produces more variety of cheese these days than the French. Now that's really saying something. If we want to be a nation that makes things, and people have made a particular topic of us being a country that makes things, if we don't want to be in a race to the bottom to sell the most commodities, then at least we have to think about the sort of landscape we want for the dairy industry heading into the future and how it can support our rural and remote communities. High-value cheese product is a way to be more profitable for some, with fewer inputs, less nitrogen, lower carbon emissions. It's not for everybody, but it's a very real option. The message that some may take out of these graphs is that the solution is to get big. But my message is a bit different. My message to some is that niche is the new big. After all, there is a growing segment of the consumer market that reject industrialised generic foods. They place a huge amount of store on provenance and production values, scarcity, brand. The growth in disposable income in Asia has created huge opportunities for Australian premium agricultural sector. So why shouldn't dairy take a slice of that pie? Of particular opportunity is that Australian dairy is fantastic. We are predominantly grass-fed, not barned animals like we have in Europe. We have excellent milk with seasonality and flavour and character. We are well placed to celebrate that in our cheese product. Terroir is a term that's heavily borrowed from the wine industry, where we know that a particular varietal grown in a particular area on particular soil can give us distinctive flavours and characteristics. We know in those circumstances that customers, consumers deeply appreciate that. So at its basic level, it's a sense of time and place. It produces flavours that represent the macro factors, and we understand macro factors to be things like climate, soil, pasture, genetics, and these things play a big part in marketing everything from Barossa Shiraz to Cape Grim beef. But really it's only raw milk cheese that also expresses the micro factors. So at our place, for instance, the microflora in the milk might be different in the cool dryness of winter compared to the hot humidity of summer, and that's going to create a different cheese. This is why I say that cheese can provide, raw milk cheese especially, can provide a snapshot in what your entire farming landscape and production systems taste like on a plate. And of course, when you overlay these things with heritage and cultural values and tradition, even production values like organic and regenerative, we are left with an understanding that there is an opportunity to increase production of Australian premium cheese. This is a casein point. See what I did there? Heritage helps. The picture on your left there, that's where I found myself making raw milk cheese at Appleby's, Cheshire. Appleby's is a farm in Shropshire. It's believed to be Britain's oldest cheese. And in this old shed, creaking with Napoleonic timbers, we made a cheese that's been made the same way for centuries. We use centuries-old hand-wound basket presses to finish off the cheese into its final shape. The Appleby's are proud of their product, and so they should. They make it from ancestral recipes. Sarah says that she's making edible heritage. Just think about that for a sec. She makes edible heritage. It's a way to keep culture and heritage alive. And I have to tell you that the Applebee's Raw Milk Cheshire is a beautiful cheese. It's delicious and firm, buttery and nutty, and it's got this backbone of Granny Smith acidity. But deep heritage is just one tool. It's not essential. On the right there, we've got a picture of Cashel. Cashel are near Tipperary. Now, the Irish don't have some ancient cultural heritage of making cheese. Nonetheless, in the little town of Cashel, not far from Tipperary, the Grub-Furno family make Ireland's most successful cheese. The milk comes from within 25 miles of their farm, and last year's production was a whopping 380 tonnes. So, to give you some perspective, Australia's biggest farmhouse blue cheese maker, which would be Berries Creek, produce 60 tonnes. Sarah and Sergio tell me that 70% of their produce is sold on the island of Ireland. Just think about that. Ireland have 5 million citizens. We have 25 million citizens. It's safe to say that they punch above their weight. And Cashel Blue is a moist, creamy blue with minerality and this apricot sweetness, which was beautiful. Look, it takes a village to raise a child, they say. And in the same sense, it takes a community of supporting structures to underpin a dynamic cheese industry. In the late 1980s, the defibrillator had to be applied to the UK cheese industry. A huge food safety outbreak with Stilton, a perception that they had old-fashioned brands, mad cow disease, tuberculosis, cultural cringe, you name it. It created a perfect storm. But out of the ashes stepped out a fellow called Randolph Hodgson, who was a cheesemonger from Neal's Yard Dairy and possibly Britain's greatest cheese fanboy. He applied his passion for UK cheeses. He convinced Prince Charles, also being the avid cheese lover, to bring together government and industry at one of his country piles to try and engineer the industry back to health. One particular cheese, which is a case in point here, another case in point, was Wensleydale, facing imminent closure, a combination of the green shoots of developing industry enthusiasm, some rebranding, a change of ownership, and the emergent champion of Neal's Yard Dairy, and a bit of luck, because by chance, in 1989, a movie called Wallace and Gromit's Big Day Out hit the screens, where an animated character called Wallace and his dog Gromit declared that their favourite cheese was Wensleydale. At the time that this was played, Wensleydale was on the canvas. They were going broke and they were just about to cease production. Today, 30 million English pounds worth of Wensleydale is produced every year. The UK industry is experiencing a resurgent passion for their own particular industry, and it was such a delight to see. And people kept telling me that I should go and visit Andy at Courtyard Dairy, which is in Yorkshire. And look, it's possibly one of the biggest cheese shops I've seen, but literally Andy's Courtyard Dairy is a stone building in the middle of a paddock in Yorkshire. And you walk in, and everywhere you look, there are giant wheels of what they call now British territorial cheeses. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and people were filing in to buy cheese. And in this vast expanse of British cheeses, there was only one cheese that was not British, and that was a Parmesan. And I thought that was just magnificent. That made my heart sing. We know that Aussies love good food. Look at the development of high-end craft beer. Look at the development of the wine industry. We know that we can make good things, and we know that we can back ourselves. So there's absolutely an opportunity to move higher up the value chain. Raw milk cheese, for sure, is aspirational. And there's a lot of ground to make up before we see that sort of widespread take-up of manufacturers in Australia. But in the meantime, I've got some recommendations for us. For the Australian cheese scene to thrive, we need an ecosystem of cheesemongers, cheese makers, peak bodies, distributors and exporters, regulators, all to be pulling in the one direction, but they aren't. Processors must be prevented from restrictive trade practices that prevent dairies from selling some local milk to cheesemakers. Dairy Australia was once upon a time opposed to raw milk cheese production. They used to have a much more active role in promoting the domestic cheese industry than they are today. I advise that it would be a welcome addition for Dairy Australia to pick that ball back up and run with it. The Australian Specialist Cheesemakers Association has concentrated largely on education and training. My advice is that they must now work on building the profile of the domestic cheese sector. We must continue to ensure that we don't place a greater regulatory burden on our domestic product than we do on the international cheeses that come in. Free trade agreements must be looked at very carefully. To this day, we can still see cheese below its production value on Australian shelves. It's not that difficult to find Danish feta at $6 a kilo. And I think, dairy farmers are getting about $8 a kilo for their solids, right? We need to ask the question, is free trade fair trade? We have to ask ourselves how we address the inherent competitive disadvantages that we have in manufactured cheese product. Industry might have to come to terms that our biggest cheese distributors have a greater interest in selling these cheaper European cheeses at a higher margin than they do Aussie ones. And Aussie producers may have to look at alternatives like forming up cooperative distribution models. Hopefully, my presentation has allowed you to grow your understanding of the Australian cheese industry. So, what can you do as a consumer? Well, next time you go to your favourite store, be it your grocer or your cheesemonger, what I would like you to do is take time to know your producer and buy Aussie. Thank you very much.